So I work at the University of Manchester on a project called Understanding Everyday Participation, Articulating Cultural Values, which is about the relationship between participation and value, and particularly about how participation is often narrowly defined as things like museums and galleries and classical concerts and things like that, when anecdotally we know that participation involves a great number of things beyond that, and we're trying to understand how that works in people's lives and what value that entails.
Can you give me an example of that kind of thing?
So some of the work that we've been doing has involved in-depth interviews in people's households in a number of different case studies across England and Scotland. And some of the people that we've been talking to are very involved in things like puppet making, and making puppets and selling things on Etsy relatively informally, people's relationship to religion, their activity in churches and other religious organisations, things like that, all of which clearly have a lot of resonance in people's lives and which they conceptualise as participation.
Okay, and just to relate it, are these some of your charts?
So what we've been doing here is we've tried to put together a fairly self-contained piece of analysis about participation in this part of the country. And what we've been looking at is participation in DIY music scenes in South Wales and the southwest of England, which is a fairly tightly connected community whose ideas and values are often at odds with standard rhetoric surrounding the cultural economy and the creative economy. And so these charts that we've got around us in both English and Welsh report the connectedness and the density of those networks and how the different relationships that are in them are clearly important in sustaining it.
And what sort of data collection methodologies are you using?
So this has all been entirely co-produced with the musicians and actors in the scenes themselves. What we've been trying to understand is the different ways in which people interact. So we've got data on the different bands that people are in, who's in bands together, whether they've been playing at the same venues at the same time, whether they've had workplaces in common, whether somebody has recorded somebody else's album or done a guest vocal or other guest performance on those albums. And as you make your way along the diagrams from the first one, which is just people in bands together, to the final one, which are all the different kinds of relationships together at once, you can see how the density of the network just gets greater and greater as you incorporate these different relationships.
And so I used to do some work on big data and analysis. And so the first layer would be, yes, you've got a data set, and that data set shows that as you go through, or in a linear way, that things get more connected, more dense.
Yep.
And to me, that would be the first level of analysis. What are the second and third types of level of analysis that you do using this data?
So some of the analysis that we've got in here incorporates various statistical measures like betweenness and density and and degree of different actors in the scene. So, for example, you can use social network analysis to understand things like, if you were to try and to integrate yourself into one of these scenes, who would be useful people to get to know in order to be introduced to other people? Not using people instrumentally, but just in the sense of, if you want to get your head around how things work and where everybody is, where are the places where most people seem to be, and who are the people who are connected to the most other people. So on this, in the sort of top right figure behind me here, those red blobs denote the betweenness. That is to say, if you want to get from one person to another one, who does it normally go through? And some of the key actors that you can see who are labelled there, most of those are people who are both performers and promoters. So people who are both in a lot of bands and are putting gigs on themselves. And so these are the sorts of relationships and positions which seem to be really important in these statistical measures. Although you can't understand everything through this sort of through this perspective. So we've also put together a publication or a zine which has been entirely put together by the musicians themselves, where they have been exploring ideas of what DIY music and the DIY aesthetic and ideology means to them. It's entirely in their own words. When we were putting it together, it was made clear that we didn't want to impose a top-down understanding of what to write about. So the pieces are all quite different from each other, but there's lots of different ways of understanding DIY. And we've been giving these away. We'll be giving these away both during the festival today and tomorrow. And we're putting a gig on tomorrow night at Club for Bach on Womanby Street from about 7:30, at which everybody is welcome. It's entirely free, and we'll be distributing it then. And you can actually hear from these bands that we've been talking about.
Sounds great. And it looks like the kind of diagram where I go, so if I want to get rich, I can figure out who I need to talk to.
I don't think anybody is getting rich in this scene.
And one last question. In terms of how the results are being put out into the different communities and how people are actually using those results in a real way, have you got any commentary on that?
So all of this data has been co-produced with the actors themselves. This isn't a case of the research team sort of swooping in, taking their data and swooping out again. This has all been put together with the artists themselves. So partly because it's interesting to represent the environments, but also to understand where some of the key points are and where what you might call some of the structural holes are. This is all data that we've collected fairly recently. We'll be working it up for both academic publication and in other formats in the next few months. Again, co-produced with the people that have been collecting the data with us.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. Fabulous project. Thank you.